She made a young housekeeper sob on her knees for 6 hours, scrubbing the same marble floor over and over, and she smiled while doing it. For 3 years, this Korean mafia boss's wife terrorized everyone in their Chicago penthouse. Nobody dared to challenge her. Nobody even tried until the day a broke former HR investigator with nothing left to lose discovered her darkest secret. This is the story of how one woman brought down a tyrant. Not with violence or money, but with a single word. And I promise you, by the end of this story, you'll never look at powerful people the same way again. This is a story about justice. No, it's about something far more powerful than that. Stay with me. Let me tell you a story about fear, lies, and what happens when someone finally refuses to be afraid. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your thoughts on the story and where you are watching from. On the 42nd floor of Chicago's most exclusive building, there was a penthouse that cost more than most people would earn in a lifetime. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city like a kingdom. Marble imported from Italy. Crystal chandeliers that caught the light like captured stars. Even the silence felt expensive. And in this world of luxury and whispered terror, there was one name that made everyone freeze. Celeste Hammond. She was the wife of Jin-ho Park, a Korean mafia boss whose name alone could make Chicago's underworld go silent. His power commanded respect through calculated force. But Celeste, she built something different. She built an empire of sadistic cruelty. The household staff would literally tremble when she entered a room. They'd seen what she could do. There was Lucia, a 19-year-old housekeeper saving money to bring her family from Mexico, forced to scrub the same section of marble floor for 6 hours over an imaginary smudge. Celeste didn't just torture her. She sat on the white sofa with champagne, periodically dropping ice cubes on the floor and demanding they be cleaned immediately. And according to those who were there, she smiled while Lucia sobbed with raw, bleeding knees. That's the kind of person Celeste Hammond was. Now into this world walked a woman named Imani Washington. Imani was 28 years old, and 3 months ago her life had fallen apart. She'd been working as an HR investigator for one of Chicago's top corporations. She loved that job. She was brilliant at it, too, uncovering workplace harassment that others missed, connecting patterns of discrimination that seemed invisible to everyone else. But then the company downsized her entire department. Budget restructuring, they said, and just like that, her career was gone. So there she was, adjusting the stiff collar of a maid's uniform, trying to remember which cleaning solution went on which surface, feeling like she'd fallen from a high-rise office and landed in a completely different universe. What Celeste Hammond didn't know, what no one knew, was that the woman, now folding her silk blouses and organizing her designer shoes, had spent years investigating people's secrets for a living. Imani's entire career had been built on one skill: finding the truth that people desperately wanted to hide. And when she witnessed Celeste's cruelty firsthand, when she saw that sadistic smile as Lucia scrubbed and sobbed, something awakened in Imani. That old familiar fire, the same burning sense of justice that had driven every workplace investigation she'd ever conducted. Someone needed to stop this woman. And since everyone else was too terrified to try, it would have to be her. Celeste Hammond thought she was untouchable. Protected by her husband's fearsome reputation, insulated by her carefully constructed identity as Boston aristocracy, secure in the knowledge that no one would ever dare to question her. But she made one critical mistake. She underestimated the broke maid with the sharp eyes and the investigator's instincts. Because while Celeste was busy terrorizing the household staff, Imani was quietly doing what she did best: digging into the past, following the threads, uncovering the truth. And what she found would shatter Celeste's entire world. This is the story of how Imani Washington discovered that Celeste Hammond, the woman who claimed descent from Boston Brahmin aristocracy, who lorded her supposed pedigree over everyone she met, was actually Candy Bartosh, a steel worker's daughter from Pittsburgh, a failed beauty pageant contestant, a woman who'd been arrested for writing bad checks, a complete and total fraud. And it's the story of what happened when Imani spoke that single word, Bartosh, in a penthouse study while a dangerous mafia boss listened from the shadows. Because sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a gun or money or connections. Sometimes it's just the truth. And in the hands of someone brave enough to speak it, one word can bring down an empire built on lies. The service elevator smelled like lemon polish and fear. Esperanza Cruz stood close to Imani, her voice barely above a whisper even though they were alone, descending from the 42nd floor after Imani's orientation. "Listen to me carefully," Esperanza said, her accent thick with urgency. "Mrs. Hammond, she has a pattern. First, she watches you, studies you like you're an insect under glass. Then she finds your weak spot, what you care about, what you need, what scares you, and then she breaks you slowly, deliberately." Imani nodded, gripping her supply cart tighter. She'd faced difficult people before in her HR days. But something in Esperanza's eyes suggested this was different. "There was a chef," Esperanza continued, glancing at the elevator numbers like they might be listening. "Philippe, trained in Paris, worked in Michelin star restaurants. Mrs. Hammond claimed she found a hair in her consommé, had him fired on the spot, then called every high-end restaurant in Chicago. He's washing dishes in Naperville now." Esperanza's voice dropped even lower. But Lucia, one of the junior housekeepers, she saw Mrs. Hammond pull out her own hair and drop it in the soup before she called Philippe to her table. She smiled while she did it. The elevator doors opened to reveal a pristine hallway. Esperanza straightened immediately, her fear transforming into professional composure like a mask snapping into place. The staff meeting happened at precisely 2 o'clock in the main living room. Imani stood in line with 5 other household employees, feeling absurdly like a soldier awaiting inspection, which as it turned out wasn't far from the truth. Celeste Hammond entered wearing a white suit that probably cost more than Imani's entire year of college tuition. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, emphasizing cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass. But it was her eyes that made Imani's breath catch, ice blue, calculating, scanning each person with the clinical precision of someone cataloging weaknesses for future exploitation. Celeste walked down the line slowly, pausing before each person. When she reached Imani, those cold eyes narrowed slightly. "You're new," Celeste said. Not a question, an accusation. "Yes, ma'am. Imani Washington." "We'll see how long you last, Miss Washington." Celeste's smile was thin, reptilian. "I have very high standards." Then Jin-Ho Park appeared in the doorway, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was younger than Imani expected, maybe 40, wearing a perfectly tailored dark suit. His presence was different from Celeste's theatrical cruelty. Quieter, denser, like gravity itself had intensified. He didn't need to perform power. He simply was power. But what struck Imani most was the way he looked at his wife. Not with love or fear or even anger. It was something closer to weary disappointment, like watching something beautiful rot from the inside out. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Imani saw something she recognized from 100 workplace investigations. A man who'd made a terrible mistake and was now calculating the cost of correcting it. He nodded once to the assembled staff and disappeared back into his office, leaving Celeste to her inspection. But Imani couldn't shake the feeling that she just witnessed something important, something that suggested the power dynamics in this penthouse were far more complicated than they appeared. Celeste dismissed them with a wave, and as Imani followed Esperanza back toward the service areas, she made a mental note. The wife might be the immediate threat, but the husband was the real power, and he was watching everything with those careful, calculating eyes. The game was more complex than she'd thought, and Imani had always been good at complex games. It happened on Imani's 3rd day in the main foyer where afternoon sunlight turned the Italian marble into something that looked like liquid gold. Imani was organizing the linen closet nearby when she heard it. A sound that made her entire body go rigid. Someone crying, not just crying. Sobbing with the kind of desperate, hiccuping gasps that came from a soul being systematically broken. She stepped into the foyer and froze. Lucia was on her hands and knees, scrubbing the same 2-foot section of marble floor with movements that had gone from frantic to mechanical to defeated. Her uniform was soaked with sweat and cleaning solution. Her knees, visible beneath her pushed-up skirt, were an angry red that was starting to bleed through the skin. Her hands trembled as she worked the brush in circles over and over and over the same spot. And there, on the white velvet sofa, positioned exactly 10 feet away, sat Celeste Hammond. She wore a pale blue dress and held a champagne flute like a scepter. Her posture was relaxed, almost lazy, like she was watching a mildly entertaining television program rather than a 19-year-old girl's psychological destruction. "I still see the smudge, Lucia," Celeste said, her voice carrying the bored tone of someone commenting on weather. She lifted an ice cube from her glass and dropped it deliberately onto the floor 3 feet from where Lucia was working. "And now there's water. Clean it immediately." Lucia's sob caught in her throat. She crawled toward the ice cube, her movements slow and painful, and began wiping at the water with her already soaked cloth. Imani felt it then, that old familiar burning in her chest, the same fire that had ignited every time she'd uncovered workplace harassment in her HR days. Every time she'd found evidence of systematic abuse disguised as management. Every time someone with power had weaponized that power against someone defenseless. This wasn't about cleanliness. This wasn't even about control. Not really. This was about something darker. This was cruelty as performance art. Sadism as sport. "Mrs. Hammond," Imani heard herself say, stepping into the foyer before her brain could stop her mouth. "I can take over for Lucia. She looks unwell." Celeste's head turned slowly, those ice-blue eyes landing on Imani with the weight of a predator noticing unexpected movement. For a moment, something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe, or irritation that her entertainment was being interrupted. Then she smiled, small, satisfied, like she just discovered a new toy. "How thoughtful of you, Miss Washington. But Lucia will finish what she started. Won't you, Lucia?" Celeste took a delicate sip of champagne, and Imani saw it clearly. The way Celeste watched Lucia's shoulders shake with fresh sobs. The way her eyes tracked every tear, every tremor, every sign of breaking. She was feeding on this, drawing sustenance from another person's suffering. And that's when Imani knew. She'd seen this before in her investigations, though never quite this extreme. People who inflicted cruelty with this much calculation, this much pleasure, this much systematic precision. They were always running from something, always hiding something. The cruelest people built their power on the shakiest foundations because deep down they were terrified of being exposed as exactly what they'd once been, powerless. Celeste Hammond had a crack in her armor. Imani couldn't see it yet, couldn't identify its exact shape or location. But it was there. It had to be because nobody became this kind of monster unless they were desperately afraid of something, and Imani had spent years learning how to find the things people were afraid of. Lucia finally collapsed, her arms giving out. Esperanza appeared from nowhere and helped the girl up, shooting Imani a warning look that said clearly, "Don't make yourself a target." But it was too late for that. Celeste was already watching Imani with those calculating eyes, already adding her to whatever twisted list she kept of people who needed to be broken. The game had begun. The summons came the next morning through Esperanza, whose expression looked like she was delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Mrs. Hammond wants you as her personal maid. Starting immediately." Esperanza gripped Imani's arm. The last girl, Simone, she lasted 2 weeks before she had a panic attack in the supply closet. Couldn't stop shaking. Had to be taken out in an ambulance. Imani nodded slowly, that investigator's brain already cataloging information, preparing for battle. Celeste's dressing room was larger than Imani's entire studio apartment. Wall-to-wall mirrors, custom lighting, racks of designer clothes organized with museum-level precision. Celeste stood at the center like a general in her war room. "My tea," she began without preamble, "must be exactly 162 degrees, not 160, not 165. Exactly 162. I can taste the difference." Imani doubted that, but said nothing. "My clothes are arranged by color, then by fabric weight within each color category. Silk before cotton, cotton before wool. Any deviation and you'll start over." Celeste's smile was sharp. "I have very particular standards, Miss Washington. Most people can't meet them." The impossible demands came in waves over the next week. Tea that was always wrong. Too hot, too cold, the wrong color despite using the identical tea bag. Pillows positioned at angles that apparently only Celeste's eyes could detect, accusations that Imani had moved things in ways that were completely invisible to any rational person. Imani documented everything. Old HR habit. Timestamps, photos, notes. If someone was building a case for your failure, you built a better case for their patterns of harassment. The design-to-fail moment came on Friday morning. Imani was hanging freshly steamed blouses when Celeste swept into the dressing room, her face already arranged in an expression of theatrical outrage. "What is this?" Celeste snatched a white silk blouse from the rack, holding it up to the light. A small yellowish stain marked the collar. "You've ruined it. This is a $3,000 Valentino, and you've stained it." The accusation hung in the air. This was the moment. The moment where Imani was supposed to panic, apologize, maybe cry. The moment where Celeste would watch her crumble and feel that familiar satisfaction of breaking another one. Instead, Imani pulled out her phone. "That stain was already there, Mrs. Hammond." Her voice was calm, professional, the same tone she'd used delivering findings in hostile HR investigations. "I photographed all garments before handling them. Standard practice to protect both the employee and employer." She turned the phone screen toward Celeste. There it was, the white Valentino blouse. Timestamp from 3 days ago. The yellowish stain clearly visible on the collar. Celeste's face went through a rapid sequence of expressions. Surprise first, genuine, unguarded surprise that someone had anticipated her game. Then irritation, sharp and hot, that her trap had failed. Then something else, something harder to read. Recalculation, maybe. A predator realizing its prey had teeth. "I see," Celeste said slowly, her voice losing some of its theatrical quality and gaining something more dangerous. "Real anger, not performed outrage. How thorough of you." "I learned to be thorough in my previous career," Imani said evenly. "It's just habit now." For several long seconds, they stared at each other. Imani kept her expression neutral, professional, unintimidated. She'd faced down executives who'd sexually harassed entire departments, managers who'd systematically discriminated against protected classes. She wasn't about to be rattled by a bully in designer clothes, no matter whose wife she was. Celeste set down the blouse with deliberate care. "You may go, Miss Washington. I'll call if I need you." It was a dismissal, but it was also something else, a recognition. For the first time in 3 years, someone in this penthouse hadn't immediately crumbled under Celeste Hammond's pressure. And as Imani left the dressing room, she caught a glimpse of Celeste's reflection in one of the many mirrors. The mask had slipped slightly. Beneath the cultivated aristocratic disdain was something raw, something that looked almost like fear. The crack in the armor was getting wider. Imani just needed to find out what it was hiding. Imani was replacing light bulbs in the hallway sconces when she heard footsteps behind her. The kind of quiet, controlled footsteps that made the air feel heavier. She turned to find Jinho Park standing less than 6 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Her heart kicked against her ribs. In 2 weeks of working here, he'd never directly addressed her. Never directly addressed any of the staff as far as she'd seen. He existed in a different orbit, moving through the penthouse like a shadow that happened to own everything the light touched. "Miss Washington." His voice was quiet, accented, but precise. "May I speak with you for a moment?" "Of course, Mr. Park." Imani climbed down from the stepladder, acutely aware of her rumpled uniform and the fact that she was holding a light bulb. He studied her for a moment, and she had the unsettling sensation of being assessed by someone who'd built an empire on reading people accurately. "I want to apologize for my wife's behavior. What happened with the blouse this morning? I'm aware of these incidents." Imani said nothing, just waited. Years of conducting investigations had taught her that silence often extracted more truth than questions. "My wife carries heavy things from her past," Jinho continued, and something flickered across his face. Sadness, maybe, or disappointment so deep it had calcified into something harder. "It makes her cruel." Not an excuse, just an explanation. "With respect, Mr. Park, people carry heavy things from their past all the time. It doesn't give them permission to torture 19-year-old girls for 6 hours." The words were out before Imani could stop them, and for a moment, she wondered if she'd just talked herself into an early grave. But Jinho's expression softened slightly, something that might have been approval crossing his features. No, it doesn't. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, pressing it into her hands. You handled yourself with dignity today. That's rare here. Rare anywhere, actually. The envelope was thick. Imani could feel the weight of cash inside, far more than any reasonable tip. I don't tolerate cruelty in my business dealings, Miss Washington. I'm precise, sometimes harsh, but never gratuitously cruel. My wife. He trailed off, shaking his head. She's different, and I'm trying to understand why. He walked away before Imani could respond, disappearing into his office with that same quiet, controlled grace. She stood in the hallway, holding the envelope and a light bulb, her mind racing. My wife carries heavy things from her past. The words echoed in her head as she returned to her quarters that night. Imani sat on her narrow bed and thought about her mentor from her HR days. Naomi Tanaka, a woman who taught her everything about workplace investigations. Naomi had a saying she repeated like a mantra. The cruelest people are often living in the most fragile houses. Their aggression isn't strength. It's architecture. They're building walls around their weakest point. And the more vicious the defense, the more vulnerable the thing they're protecting. Celeste Hammond's cruelty wasn't random. It was systematic, calculated, performed. She didn't just hurt people. She selected them carefully, broke them methodically, watched their destruction with that satisfied smile. That level of sadism wasn't about power. It was about fear. What was Celeste so afraid of? Imani opened her laptop. The investigator's instinct fully awakened now. She typed Celeste Hammond into the search bar and hit enter. It was time to find out what heavy things Celeste was carrying, and more importantly, why those heavy things made her into a monster who needed to be stopped. Imani found Esperanza in the service kitchen during the afternoon break, folding linens with the mechanical precision of someone whose hands knew the work, but whose mind was elsewhere. How long has Mrs. Hammond been married to Mr. Park? Imani asked, keeping her voice casual as she poured coffee. Esperanza's hands paused mid-fold. 3 years. Maybe a little more. Why? Just curious. She ever talk about her life before Chicago? Family, old friends, where she grew up? Never. Esperanza set down the linen, her eyes narrowing with understanding. You're digging, aren't you? Like you used to do in your old job. Imani didn't deny it. Esperanza glanced toward the door, then lowered her voice. She appeared out of nowhere. One day, there's an engagement announcement in all the magazines. Jinho Park marrying some Boston socialite nobody had ever heard of. The wedding was small, private. No family on her side. She said they were all dead. No childhood friends, no college roommates, nobody from her past. It's like she didn't exist before she became Mrs. Park. That's not unusual for someone trying to escape a difficult past, Imani said, playing devil's advocate. Maybe. Esperanza picked up another linen. But it's like she's a woman with no past at all. No stories, no memories, no slip-ups. Everything about her is too rehearsed, you know? That night, Imani sat cross-legged on her bed with her laptop, diving into the kind of research that had once been her profession. She started with the basics. Celeste Hammond in public records databases. Almost nothing. A few society page mentions from the past 3 years, charity galas, restaurant openings, always on Jinho's arm, always described with words like elegant and refined. But before that, a digital ghost, no college records, no previous addresses, no social media presence predating her engagement, no trail of the thousands small digital breadcrumbs that everyone left in the modern world. She found the engagement announcement in Town & Country's online archives dated 3 years and 2 months ago. The photo showed a younger Celeste, already polished but somehow less finished. The caption read, Technology magnate Jinho Park announces his engagement to Boston socialite Celeste Hammond, daughter of the late Reginald Hammond. Imani clicked through to a deeper search on Reginald Hammond. Dozens of results. Reginald Hammond, the dentist in Tampa. Reginald Hammond, the retired accountant in Phoenix. Reginald Hammond, who died in 2008 in Oklahoma. None connected to Boston society. None with daughters the right age. None matching the patrician lineage Celeste claimed. She cross-referenced Boston's social registers, alumni databases from the expected schools, Wellesley, Smith, Radcliffe. Nothing. No Celeste Hammond. No Hammond family in the social register that matched the timeline. It was too neat, too polished, too perfect. Imani had seen this before. Not often, but enough to recognize the pattern. People who reinvented themselves completely, who built new identities from carefully selected pieces of other people's lives. The con artists who chose common names that were impossible to trace. The fraudsters who claimed dead parents who couldn't contradict their stories. Celeste Hammond's past wasn't missing. It was constructed. And somewhere in the real past, the one Celeste had buried under layers of lies and carefully maintained performances, was the truth, the thing she was so desperately afraid of, the weakness that made her lash out with such calculated cruelty at anyone who might consciously or unconsciously remind her of who she'd really been. Imani leaned back against her pillow, staring at the ceiling of her small room. She'd found the crack in Celeste's armor. Now she just needed to figure out what was hidden inside it. And she knew exactly where to start looking. Not forward in Celeste's fabricated aristocratic present, but backward into whoever she'd been before she became Mrs. Jean Ho Park. The real question was, who had Celeste Hammond been before she'd learned to be cruel? Imani downloaded Celeste's engagement photo from the Town and Country announcement and ran it through reverse image search at 2 in the morning. Her laptop screen, the only light in her small room. The first page of results showed exactly what she expected, the same society page mentions, the same carefully curated digital presence. But on the third page, buried beneath the polished results, was a cached page from a website that no longer existed. She clicked through, her heart rate accelerating. The page loaded slowly, a relic from 2018, Steel Town Models and Promotions, Pittsburgh's premier talent agency. The design was cheap, the photos grainy, but there in the third row of headshots was a face Imani recognized instantly. Celeste, younger, maybe 24 or 25. The bone structure was identical, but everything else was different. Harder makeup, cheaper styling, hair teased higher, an edge to her expression that suggested hunger rather than aristocratic refinement. And beneath the photo, a name, Candy Bartosh. Available for promotional work, trade shows, special events. Candy Bartosh. Imani sat back, that familiar investigative thrill flooding her system. She typed the name into YouTube, filtering by upload date, narrowing the parameters to before 2019. The third result made her breath catch. Miss Steel City Dreams 2017 full pageant. The video had 247 views. Imani pressed play. The production quality was amateur, a small-town beauty pageant held in what looked like a high school auditorium. The contestants wore evening gowns that ranged from elegant to desperate. And there competing in the interview portion was Celeste Hammond. Except she wasn't Celeste Hammond yet. She was Candy Bartosh, and she was trying so hard it was almost painful to watch. Miss Bartosh, the judge asked, tell us about your background and what inspires you. Candy's smile was bright, practiced, but her voice was completely different. The accent was harder, flatter with those distinct Pittsburgh inflections that her current polished speech concealed so carefully. Well, I grew up in a working-class family here in Pittsburgh, Candy said. And Imani heard genuine pride mixed with defensiveness. My dad worked at the mill for 30 years before it closed. He taught me that you got to fight for what you want in this life, that nobody's going to hand you nothing. I'm competing tonight because I want to show that girls like me, girls from neighborhoods like mine, we can be anything. We can be elegant. We can be refined. We deserve to be seen as more than just where we come from. The desperation in those words was visceral. The need to be seen as something other, something better, something more. Imani recognized it because she'd heard it 1,000 times in her HR investigations. The voice of someone who'd internalized the message that who they were wasn't good enough. The video continued. Candy didn't win. She placed third. The camera caught her face when the winner was announced. A flash of such raw, bitter disappointment that it was almost uncomfortable to witness. Imani scrolled down to the comments section. Most were generic, posted years ago. But one posted just 2 years ago made her screenshot immediately. Candy Bartosh thought she was too good for the rest of us even back then. Looking down on everyone from the neighborhood. Guess she finally found someone rich enough to get her out. Good riddance. Imani replayed the interview portion 3 more times, studying the woman who would become Celeste Hammond. The accent, the desperation, the poorly concealed shame about her working-class origins mixed with defiant pride, the hunger to be someone else, somewhere else, anything else. This was the secret. This was what Celeste had buried under layers of aristocratic performance and sadistic cruelty. She wasn't running from tragedy or trauma. She was running from ordinariness, from being Candy Bartosh, mill worker's daughter, failed beauty queen, girl from a neighborhood she'd spent her whole life trying to escape. And now Imani understood why Celeste targeted the household staff with such vicious precision. Every maid, every housekeeper, every working-class person in that penthouse was a mirror reflecting back the thing Celeste feared most, the girl she used to be. The court records from Allegheny County, Pennsylvania were public information accessible through a database Imani had used hundreds of times in her HR investigations. She typed in Bartosh, Candy, and filtered by date ranged, 2017 to 2019. The result appeared at 3:40 in the morning. Bartosh, Candy, petitioner v. Navarro, Trevor, defendant. Dissolution of marriage filed March 2018. Imani clicked through to the full docket. The divorce had been finalized quickly, suspiciously quickly for contested proceedings. She cross-referenced the defendant's name. Trevor Navarro had his own extensive record. Arrested in 2019 for wire fraud and identity theft. The charges detailed an elaborate credit card scam targeting elderly victims across 3 states. Imani found a Pittsburgh Post-Gazette article from that year with the headline, "Local man sentenced to 8 years for elder fraud scheme." The article was thorough. Trevor Navarro, 34, had been running scams since his early 20s. Small cons at first, then increasingly ambitious operations. The article mentioned that his ex-wife had cooperated with prosecutors providing testimony that helped secure his conviction. His ex-wife, Candy Bartosh. Imani kept digging, following the thread backward. Another article from the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, smaller, from early 2018. 2 arrested in bad check scheme. The piece was brief, describing how Candy Bartosh, 25, and Trevor Navarro, 33, had been arrested for writing fraudulent checks to multiple businesses. But charges against Candy were later dropped after she agreed to cooperate with a larger investigation into Navarro's activities. And there, embedded in the article, barely noticeable unless you were specifically looking for it, was a thumbnail image. Imani clicked to enlarge it. A mugshot. Allegheny County Sheriff's Office. Candy Bartosh. The date stamp read February 2018. It was unmistakably her. Younger, harder, makeup smeared, hair disheveled. The expression on her face wasn't the cold aristocratic disdain Imani knew. It was raw fear mixed with humiliation. The look of someone whose carefully constructed life had just collapsed completely. Imani leaned back. The full picture finally assembled. Celeste Hammond didn't exist. She was a complete fabrication, a persona built from scratch by a desperate woman trying to escape not just her past, but her entire identity. Candy Bartosh, daughter of a Pittsburgh mill worker, failed beauty queen who'd placed 3rd in a regional pageant. Woman who'd married a con artist, maybe out of love, maybe because she thought he was her ticket out, probably some combination of both. Arrested alongside him when his schemes finally caught up, made a deal, testified against him, watched him go to prison while she walked free. And then she'd done what desperate people do when their old life becomes unbearable. She'd invented a new one. She'd become Celeste Hammond, Boston socialite, daughter of the conveniently dead Reginald Hammond. She'd erased every trace of Candy Bartosh, the accent, the origins, the arrest record she'd probably hoped was buried too deep for anyone to find. She'd taught herself to move differently, speak differently, be different. And somehow she'd convinced Jean Ho Park that her aristocratic performance was reality. But the past had weight. You could bury it, disguise it, run from it, but it never truly disappeared. And Candy's past had manifested as Celeste's cruelty. Every time she looked at the household staff, the maids, the housekeepers, the working-class people just trying to survive, she saw a reflection of who she'd been. And she destroyed them for it. Systematically, sadistically, with that satisfied smile that wasn't about power at all. It was about fear. The terror that someone would look at her and see Candy Bartosh instead of Celeste Hammond, that someone would speak the truth she'd spent 3 years running from. Imani had found the crack in Celeste's armor. And behind it wasn't strength or confidence or aristocratic breeding. Behind it was a frightened girl from Pittsburgh who traded a con artist husband for a crime boss husband and convinced herself that made her royalty. Now Imani just had to decide what to do with that information. The summons came during the lunch hour when the penthouse was usually empty. The other staff on their breaks. Esperanza's text was brief. Mrs. Hammond wants you in the study now. Be careful. Imani walked through the silent penthouse, her phone in her pocket containing screenshots of everything. The pageant video, the court records, the mugshot. Insurance in case this went wrong. In case Celeste's threats weren't empty. The study door was open. Celeste sat behind the mahogany desk in a white suit so sharp it looked like armor. Her posture perfect, her expression coldly composed. She gestured to the chair across from her. Sit. Imani sat, keeping her hands relaxed in her lap, her breathing steady. She'd been in hostile confrontations before, executives who'd screamed, managers who'd threatened lawsuits, HR directors who'd tried to intimidate her into silence. This was just another version of the same dance. I've been patient with you, Miss Washington, Celeste began, her voice carrying that aristocratic precision. More patient than I should have been, but I've noticed something recently. A certain composure, a lack of appropriate fear, and I think we need to clarify the situation you're in. She stood, walking to the window, her back to Imani. The white suit caught the afternoon light. My husband is a very powerful man. A very dangerous man. People who disrespect him tend to disappear permanently. Celeste turned and her smile was venomous. Now imagine what happens to someone who disrespects me. His wife. The woman he's chosen to share his life and his empire. Imani said nothing. Just watched Celeste perform her threat like it was a rehearsed monologue. I can make sure you never work again. Not just in Chicago, anywhere. I can destroy your reputation, your future, possibly your life. Do you understand the kind of power you're dealing with? Celeste leaned forward, hands on the desk. What do you think my husband will do to someone who disrespects me? Imani met her eyes calmly. I think he'll probably wonder why Candy Bartosh from Pittsburgh thinks she can give orders in his name. The effect was immediate and devastating. Celeste's face drained of color so quickly she looked like she might faint. Her hands, pressed against the desk, began to tremble. What did you just say? The words came out barely above a whisper. Bartosh, Imani repeated, letting the name hang in the air like a verdict. That's your real name, isn't it? Not Hammond. Bartosh. Candy Bartosh, born and raised in Pittsburgh, daughter of a mill worker. Competed in Miss Steel City Dreams in 2017, placed third. Married Trevor Navarro in 2018. Got arrested with him for writing bad checks. Cut a deal, testified against him, watched him go to prison while you reinvented yourself as Boston aristocracy. Celeste's carefully constructed composure was shattering in real time. Her hands shook, her breathing became ragged, and when she spoke, her accent slipped just slightly, but enough. The flat Pittsburgh vowels bleeding through the polished diction. You can't. I can, Imani said quietly. I have court records, newspaper articles, a mugshot from the Allegheny County Sheriff's Office. I have video of you at that pageant talking about your working-class family, your father at the mill. I have everything, Celeste. Or should I say Candy? No. Celeste's voice cracked. No, you don't understand. That person, she doesn't exist anymore. I'm not her. I'm not. You are exactly her, Imani interrupted. You're just wearing a more expensive costume, and you've been torturing people. People just trying to survive just like you were trying to survive because they remind you of what you're running from. The door to the adjacent office opened and Jinho stepped through. Celeste spun toward him, her face a mixture of hope and terror. Jinho, she's lying. I've been listening to the entire conversation, Jinho said, his voice cold and flat. He looked at Celeste with an expression that made Imani's earlier observation crystallize. Weary disappointment. And I've known about Candy Bartosh for 6 months. Did you really think I don't investigate everyone close to me? That I'd marry someone without knowing exactly who they were? Celeste swayed slightly, gripping the desk for support. I married you because I thought you understood reinvention, Jinho continued. I came from nothing in Seoul, absolutely nothing. I built everything you see, from desperation and intelligence and ruthlessness when necessary. I thought you'd done the same. I thought you understood what it meant to survive, to transform yourself, to become something more. His voice hardened. But instead of learning compassion from your struggles, you learned cruelty. You torture people who remind you of where you came from. You've turned this home into a place of fear because you're afraid, and I won't have it anymore. Jinho, please. Celeste's voice was breaking, the polished accent completely gone now, pure Pittsburgh desperation bleeding through. Get out of my home, he said simply. Pack what you need. My attorney will contact you about the divorce. Celeste turned to Imani, her face twisted with rage and desperation. You've ruined everything. Everything I built. You ruined it yourself, Imani said, standing. But I'll give you terms. You leave quietly. You don't contact anyone on this staff ever again. You don't try to salvage your reputation by attacking anyone else. You just disappear the way you wanted Candy Bartosh to disappear. And if I don't, then every detail of your past becomes public. Every pageant video, every court record, every mugshot. I'll make sure everyone in your social circle knows exactly who Celeste Hammond really is. Your choice. Celeste stared at her for a long moment, and Imani saw the exact instant when the fight drained out of her. When Candy Bartosh, exhausted from 3 years of pretending, finally gave up. Fine, she whispered. I'll go. Celeste left the penthouse exactly 30 minutes later. Wheeling a single designer suitcase, her white suit somehow looking less like armor and more like a costume she was finally taking off. Her posture was defeated, shoulders curved inward, the aristocratic bearing completely gone. She looked smaller, ordinary human. As the elevator doors closed on her, applause erupted from the hallway. The household staff had been watching from various doorways, witnessing the fall of their tormentor. Lucia was there, the girl who'd scrubbed marble for 6 hours, tears streaming down her face, but smiling. Esperanza pushed through the small crowd and embraced Imani, sobbing with relief. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for being brave enough. Within the hour, a man in an expensive suit appeared. Dashiell Ortega, introduced as Jinho's attorney for his legitimate business interests. He'd witnessed the entire confrontation from the adjacent office. Mr. Park owns several legal enterprises, Ortega explained. His card identifying him as specializing in corporate law, real estate development, restaurants, import, export. We need someone to head compliance and internal investigations. Someone with integrity who can't be intimidated. The pay is substantially better than your previous HR position. Imani accepted before he'd finished explaining the benefits package. Later that evening, Jinho found her on the penthouse terrace, looking out over the city as the sun set over Chicago's skyline. You didn't have to do what you did today, he said quietly, standing beside her. You could have been killed. You thought you could have been killed. Why risk it? Imani considered the question. Because someone had to and everyone else was too afraid. I've been trying to transition away from my criminal operations for 3 years, Jinho said. And there was something vulnerable in his admission. Building legitimate businesses, distancing myself from the violence. But it's difficult to trust people when you've lived in a world where deception is currency and betrayal is constant. He turned to look at her directly. You stood up to someone you believed could have you killed. That's either extraordinary courage or extraordinary foolishness. Either way, it's exactly what I need. Someone with a moral compass who doesn't break under pressure. Someone who investigates truth instead of constructing lies. There was something in the air between them. Complicated, dangerous, but undeniably real. An attraction built not on the usual foundations, but on recognition. Two people who understood what it meant to reinvent yourself, though they'd chosen vastly different paths. His phone rang, breaking the moment. He glanced at the screen. Celeste's attorney, requesting a meeting about the divorce settlement. A slight smile crossed his face, not cruel but knowing. She's going to learn that Candy Bartosh's survival skills are more valuable than Celeste Hammond's pretensions ever were. Hopefully this time she'll learn the right lessons. He left to take the call and Imani remained at the windows, her reflection superimposed over the city lights beginning to flicker on below. She thought about the journey that had brought her here from corporate HR investigator to unemployed to maid to whatever she was becoming now. The most powerful thing you can do is refuse to be afraid of someone else's constructed image. She realized real power isn't about who you can hurt. It's about who you are when no one's watching. And the funny thing about people who build their entire identity on lies, one word of truth can bring the whole thing crashing down. She touched the window glass, feeling the cool surface against her palm. For the first time in months, she recognized the woman in the reflection. Not as a displaced professional scrambling for survival. Not as a maid out of place in a world of luxury and danger, but as someone who'd refused to be afraid when everyone else was terrified, someone who'd seen injustice and decided to stop it. Consequences be damned. And that, she realized with sudden clarity, was the most dangerous thing any truthful person could be. Behind her, the penthouse hummed with new energy. Staff members moved with lighter steps, spoke with fuller voices, existed without fear for the first time in 3 years. Lucia was laughing in the kitchen. Esperanza was singing while she worked. One woman's courage had changed an entire world. Imani smiled at her reflection and thought about tomorrow, her first day in her new position, building something legitimate with a man trying to escape his own constructed identity. It would be complicated. It would be challenging. It might even be dangerous, but it would be real. And after everything she'd been through, real was exactly what she needed. In this story, we learned that the most powerful weapon against cruelty isn't violence or money. It's the courage to speak one word of truth. Thank you so much for watching. Can you like, subscribe, and share?